you for staying with us. North, south, east, west. The country's power sector faced unprecedented challenges in the year gone by. Staggering 12 national grid collapses and 128 transmission towers destroyed in the course of the year by November last year. Now, the incident occurred 3 times a week, crippled power supply across the country, exposing the vulnerabilities in our nation's power grid. And of course, some of us will recall what the Minister for Power said was the cause. And we'll understand that the Minister said it's all due to vandalism. Despite an installed capacity of 13,000 megawatts, Nigeria's power grid transmits on the average 4,000 megawatts due to aging infrastructure in a country where we need electricity supply in quite a lot more than we have right now. Let's have conversations around this, review the access to electricity parameters of Nigeria in the year 2024 and look forward with Mr. Abubakar Umar, who is an electricity consultant joining us from Yola, as well as Dr. Ayodele Oni, who is an energy policy expert. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having us.
Let me begin with you, Mr. Umar. If you look back, or rather, when you look back into the year 2024, what would be your assessment of how we operated as a nation, particularly in the electricity sector of the energy industry?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good morning and Happy New Year. When we look at the 2024 year, so much has happened. There are a lot of changes from the economic point across the entire value chain. When you look at on the generation aspect segment, you realize that we have Zungeru, which is a hydro dam that comes on stream, and then but the total generation has remained, stable, not necessarily with a significant increase. And then when you look at the transmission in last year, you will see that so much has happened. There are a lot of grid collapses. There is so much, vandalism that happens in the last year, which triggered a lot of collapse. And then also TCN have installed some various transformers across the country, and they are also undergoing the process of unbundling, into ISO and then TSP. So these are all things that happens. And then the most important aspect which relates to people, when you look at the distribution value chain, that's where a lot of changes and a lot of development has been ongoing. When we start around April, when the government has increased the electricity tariff by more than 200%, at that time, there is so much issue, which is also, we know that is caused by the currency devaluation. And then when you look at different programs introduced in 2024, although some are still undergoing, for instance, the presidential metering initiative, which is now and trying to actualize in this current year. And then when you look at the Dissect program that, has been approved recently around this November, December, which is meant to be implemented also this year. And then when you look at the acquisition of some discos, we are also informed that Kaduna and Echo are undergoing some kind of, acquisition by some investors. So there are a lot of, changes in the value chain. And then when you look at the regulatory angle, which is the regulator themselves, there has been a lot of regulatory orders issuance to states to take over the regulatory aspect of their industry. I think currently now we have 9 states which also are taking over, their regulatory oversight. And then there is also the need of bilateral. So when we look at, I will say, there has been a very busy year, considering the fact that so many changes has happened. There are so much updates. The regulator is trying to shift the burden of, electricity to decentralize to the states. And then a lot of other things. So I will say in a summary, the performance is fair. It's not as we expect, but at least it is fair. I will give it a fair performance assessment.
How about the cost of it? Cost of electricity, either for domestic use or even for small businesses?
Yeah, on this issue, of course, currently now in this country, I think 80% of the problem we are facing can be traced back to currency devaluation. So in as much as the cost is high, the problem is that when you look at one side, it's a necessity. This cost must be adjusted for that sector to be sustainable. But when you look at the other side of consumers, you realize that their income is not commensurate to the cost that is, has been rise significantly. So I will say that on the other side of electricity, they have done what they can do. It remains the government side to adjust on the income of consumers. I'm aware that 70,000 minimum wage was approved, but then a question of is it enough? That's something that is debatable. But then every other aspect of cost, in this country, not only electricity, we can see the fuel price, we can even see the telecoms, agitating for an increase in price. So everything can be traced back to the currency devaluation. And I think the earlier we accept that, the better for us. Let us try to work to make sure that the government increase our income to afford. I think we should have this discussion toward affording it rather than to focus on reducing the cost to a level that I think it is no longer sustainable.
Ms. Soni, we have often said in Nigeria that with constant power, a lot of things will fall into place in Nigeria, especially in the area of business. Small businesses would thrive. And there has been an amendment to the Constitution which says that states can generate and distribute their own power. Are you seeing any movement in this area? Are the states making any movement towards generating power and making their economies what they should be?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, properly said, I think the Constitution allows states to take over regulating and making laws with respect to generation, transmission, and distribution. Now, the issue is whether they can make investing in their states investment friendly, whether they can make generation activities investment friendly. That said, by virtue of the Electricity Act, states are supposed to the extent there's no obligation, that's the first thing we need to note. And that's the beauty of federalism, you understand? So states can take over, and up to 14 states have started that process. Not many of them are finished. It's a process, it's at least you'll be looking at least 6 months to finish from when you notify the federal regulator that you want to take over. So a number of states are. Very recently, I'm sure you heard about Lagos State and the funfair around that. And you've got Imo, you've got Ondo, Ekiti. So they are. In fact, my own postulation is that in a few years, it will be a campaign point whether a state has sufficient power, reasonably affordable, because there's always a debate between access and price. I think that some states are beginning to take that step, but in a federal system of government, not all states need to do that, to be honest. If you can't afford it, if you don't think your state is investment friendly yet, or has the financial capacity, because taking over the electricity sector or market goes beyond generation, goes beyond providing irrevocable standing payment orders, which state governors have done to support certain power projects in their states. It's a whole gamut, because we begin to now talk about a wholesale and a retail market, a national wholesale and a retail market, particularly for states. So states are already doing that. About 14 of them are taking at one stage or the other. But it will take time. It will be a steep learning curve, to be honest. It will take time. But I do not also think all of them will succeed. I think some will and some will fail. But yes, steps are already being taken.
I find it comical, a little funny actually, and maybe not funny, that you have already seen the campaign value in electricity production. Well, there is something that we've heard that the minister has also said concerning the grid collapses. It's a vexed issue. It's as annoying as it comes, as frustrating for Nigerians. Almost like if the federal government were to say, oh, there will be electricity for 24 hours in the first 2-3 months of the year, everyone would disbelieve, like they disbelieved, the NNPC over time. But the minister has alleged that vandalism it played a significant role in the issue of the grid collapses. 128 transmission towers were destabilized, were destroyed, were vandalized in the course of the year, and which further destabilized power supply. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree that that's part of the problem, to be honest. It's multi-faceted. It's not just that. Also, you've got poor quality of infrastructure over time. For example, I'll give you a simple example. If you look at the southeast, almost all of the southeast and a large, northeast and a large portion of the northwest use radial single circuit lines, transmission lines, such that if there's a disturbance in the northeast, for example, in one portion, almost all of the northeast goes off, and much of the northwest too. So over time, these should have been made triangular. So it's poor planning several years, and I did not necessarily speak about this administration. An example, between 1987 until when we started the privatization, there had been no major upgrade to the transmission system. Imagine that, what the population was in 1987 and what it was about 2010, 2013, 2017, when we started to do some work on our transmission network. So yes, it's partly correct, but I also think that if you have an emergency management system, the SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition, which is now being put in place, then some of those would not have occurred, particularly those that were incessant. There was a period it happened, it was resolved, it happened again within 24 hours, and then another 72 hours. If you average it out, that would be one grid collapse every month at the minimum, because we had at least 12, partial or total. So I think it's a potpourri of issues, but he's quite right about the role vandalism plays. And his suggestion that it should be death penalty, I think that's a bit.
But couldn't the federal government or anyone have seen this coming? This infrastructure were not in space, and they were not invisible. Everyone could see them. So if there was vandalism that was going to take place, some people would see them. So isn't it possible to have foreseen that these things would happen? Telcos had that problem for a while, and somehow we don't hear much of it anymore. Even if it still exists, it's not as significant as it was in time past. So shouldn't the federal government have seen this coming and done something about it?
The contract for surveillance that I'm aware of. There's a contract for surveillance across several kilometers. The question then is what's happening with that contract? Is it well implemented? I always say this: the problem with Nigeria is not brilliant people, lack of brilliant people or brilliant laws or policies. And I dare say the minister is quite a brilliant individual. Now, the issue is with one, implementation, two, at times corruption. So you'd ask yourself, what's wrong, what's happening with that contract? There is actually a surveillance contract in place. It's implementation you need to ask. How is government's role? We really don't care. You and I shouldn't be bothered. If you ask for a job, you then have an obligation to perform. But yes, you could make excuses around the historical challenges, and because of the long lead times around energy, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's electricity, whether it's even mining to a more limited extent, it's a long lead time. So if you begin to do things, you at times do not see the real result immediately. It's very difficult to get things over the counter. Usually, you'd have a 2-3 year planning period and working towards achieving what you want to do. Azura took 7 years at the minimum, for example. So yes, they should anticipate. You should have an EMS, an emergency management system in place, have your SCADA. Even in cases where you have plant strip off, you should have spinning reserves, because if you look at our market rules, grid code, you find all of these. But are they being implemented as they should be? I dare say no. And I think that's where the challenge is. Implementing these things we put in place.
But Mr. Oni, we were talking about the oil and gas sector just before this segment, and we were told that now that technology has been put in place to keep an eye on the pipelines, there are fewer cases of vandalism. Can technology not be applied in this sector as well to prevent these things that are causing these grid collapses all the time?
Absolutely, and that's why I mentioned an emergency management system. Technology does play a role in an EMS. It's technology, it's also the human factor. Letting the people in that environment know that they have a stake in that infrastructure. Because technology alone would not solve problems, because they are enablers and human beings are behind technology. That's why you find out that the worst haste in the world are technology driven. So if you have technology and you do not have the human interface, and you do not play that role, that's why technology, AI, artificial intelligence will not work without having some form of human interface, programming, and all of that. So I think that technology will begin to play a role. And like I did mention, they've started to put an EMS in place. It's now whether the guys who are supposed to work alongside that technology do what they're supposed to do, and whether there's proper monitoring, checks, and balances. That's what we expect in the power sector, and hopefully in the coming year, this year, the minister and everyone else working, and state governors can do more to ensure that there's protection of infrastructure. The law already does have provisions around punishment, serious, and there are copious provisions around those. So it's technology, it's also the human factor, and letting the people in that environment know that this infrastructure is important to them. Maybe even reorientation. So our issues are technology, soft issues too, like reorientation too, do play a critical role.
Well, quite a number of things happened in the year gone by. Let me ask you, Mr. Omar, how significant was the tiff, the little ish between the generating companies and the distribution companies in particular?
Yeah, you know, a lot of things happen in the past year, and when you ask about the tiff between the generating and the distribution, I will say the summary is about money. The issue is about liquidity, right? The generating companies are expecting their funds from the distribution company, which is the end of the value chain. But at the end of the day, you realize that the money that the generating company is getting is not up to 40% of their invoices. So that's a very difficult thing to do. From the inception of the power generation to the consumption, you as a generating company, you are getting less than 40% of your invoice. That poses a challenge. That poses a threat, and this calls a question of how viable, how are the generating companies able to keep supplying, you know, the people, and the answer is simple. It goes back to you know, the company supplying them gas, which means there are a lot of backlog of gas amount that is always going unsettled. That's the reason why we keep having this electricity without, you know, the full payment. Today, if those gas companies decide that they need 100% of their funds, it will just, you know, everybody will not have this energy. So, and that's also, you know, part of the reason why I said when they increased that tariff to that Ban tariff around April last year, it improves the inflows a little bit, but not as, you know, a satisfactory level that the generating companies will wish to have. And another thing that the discourse have been discussing is the issue of metering, which is a very, very difficult thing. You know, in a customer population of 30 million in the country, only about 6 or 7 million are metered. And that's why I see, you know, the minister has tried to come up with some initiatives, particularly the PMI, which is the presidential metering. So far, they have planned to, you know, inject 700 billion naira from the federation account. And when you look at the analysis, 420 billion was already deducted from the FAQ analysis sheet so far, which means based on the technical advisor's information, he said by the Q1 and Q2 of this year, they are going to install 2 million meters. Although that's a stretch, but I believe some progress will be made. But that number, I don't believe the utilization will be 100%. But this is a step in the right direction, and the metering installation need to be moving fast as possible, considering the fact that people cannot afford to pay 200 naira for electricity without meter in their houses, and that's a significant challenge. So the better or the more fast they install those meters, the better for them, because metering is one of the lifeblood of revenue recovery. As long as you have meter, your revenue is assured. With little effort means to cater for that.
Mr. Tony, Let's look at the issue of pricing. The band A, for instance, went from 68 naira per unit to 225 naira. So sometimes, even when the electricity is there, people cannot access it because it is too expensive. The speed with which we went up in price, I mean, can you really justify that? We didn't go up gradually. We just flew from 68 to 225.
Yes, I think it's same with the brother reforms. I think that I've been of the view that, and maybe the president is wrong and I'm right, I don't know. I've been of the view that some of these reforms should be taken one after the other. The reforms all came like a flood, right? Similar for what's happening in the electricity sector. Now, there's always been that debate and argument between access. Now, access means it's available, and affordability. Available, if you can't afford it, then you can't access it, despite the fact that the door is open. Now, I think I'm of the view that the analysis is that it's just 15% of that population, and that they think it's people who can afford it. There are positives and there are negatives there, because the argument around feeders, certain feeders, even permeating areas where people can afford that amount. So it's feeder based, right? But people have had those arguments, and some people have also said that. So there's the positives. Some people then begin to have electricity if you can afford it. But is that fair? Is a debate. However, on the other side, there are debates that you're then saying that if I can afford, I pay what? I pay almost $1 million every month, sadly, where I live, because an estate, and it's an IPP in this case, not even band A, because the disco facility is bad. So the question is, if I can afford it, not necessarily the case that everyone else can. Yeah. So there will always be positives and negatives. The intention is, this argument, I think it's even more expensive than places like Canada. There are debates that, they use more hydro and all of that. I think it's quite expensive. But it's come down anyway. I think it's about 206.50 kobo now, if I'm not mistaken, for band A. So yes, I think access first, and then as it becomes more attractive for investment, prices come down. Look at what happened even with PMS. It went as high as 1,004, 1,006, and now it's about 899. So I think that if states do enough, then you have enough space at the national grid, and prices can come down. Recall that we're also paying for inefficiency. So if you pay for inefficiency, you're paying so much, right? So those inefficiencies need to go down. That's why NERC is forcing certain discos to be sold. I hear Ibadan, Kano is gone, Kaduna, Benin, still some disputes, but that's also going. So I think that it usually is the case that when you have such reforms, things can be that way. Things can initially be expensive. But if you continue to work at it, push, we will then begin to see more competition, more sources, more alternatives. People become more creative. Like a Glow at that time when some other guy said you couldn't do per minute or per second rather, and then he started to do the per second. So I expect that this can be the case. We can't directly compare electricity to telecoms, but it's still market, right? It's market forces of demand and supply. The more supply you have, prices then go down. Of course, you need to take into consideration the inputs, such as gas. But if we begin to have more hydro get connected, and we do an economic merit dispatch arrangement where the cheaper sources of electricity are dispatched before the more expensive, then you would have hydro and all of that, and that can drive down the price. Because I've had that argument with some guys at NERC that our electricity is even more expensive at the band A level than what you have in places like Canada and elsewhere. So you're right, but I think that you can look at it depending on what side of the table you sit. There are pros, to be honest, and there are definitely issues with it. And an issue around enforcement too. People have argued that when they have local issues beyond the feeder, then it's still a problem, because you say 20 hours from the feeder, but I have issues with my transmitter and even my meter. I have to change my meter and I have to pay for it. I have to pay all of that money.
Didn't the government come out recently, Dr. Oni? Didn't the government come out recently to say that people shouldn't be paying for these meters?
Okay, that's true. And it then goes to enforcement. I say we say the right things, we have the right policies, we have brilliant people, but the bridge we always fail to cross is the bridge of enforcement. One, two. I also think mine is slightly different because it's an IPP. But that said, I think that's government policy, and that's what the rules state.
But we need to answer. We need to understand that situation, Dr. Oni. We sincerely need to, and maybe Mr. Omar will also want to weigh in later, because more than once, the government, NERC, through NERC, has come out to say people should not be paying for meters. As far back as the Fashola days as Minister of Power, we heard that we shouldn't be paying for meters.
Because the meters do not belong to the customer.
Because the meters do not belong to us. My phone is mine, I buy it, right? But I can determine which network I want to put in on it. However, I can't do the same for electricity, right? So why should I have to pay for meters?
Okay, so I'll take you through history, summarily, very quickly, within a minute. Initially, it was a case that you didn't have to. At some point, you had to, but then you get discounted billing so that you can recover that sum over a period of time. At some point, you could have an arrangement with your disco around meters. Even in the Electricity Act, you can invest in the network and then get that money back, right? So the policy at the moment is that you're not supposed to pay for meters, but because all of this infrastructure at the end of the day belong to the disco. But enforcement is a different conversation. One. Two, it's also a Nigerian thing. More often than not, when there's a challenge, rather than go through the old org, maybe because of the length of time, people just prefer to, you know what, I've got the money, let me deal with this issue and move on, rather than not have electricity for the next 1 month, next 2 or 3 months. So it still goes to enforcement. It goes to ensuring that there is speed in resolving all of these issues. Because if you look at the process, at times you need to first go back to the disco, which is the source of the problem. When you then do not get a resolution, before you then can move to NERC. So there's a process in place. It's whether we are willing to, it's similar to someone eats your car, whether you can call insurance, whether you can go to court. Most people just move on. And I think it's a Nigerian thing. If we begin to enforce rights, begin to use the court system more, you would find out that some of these things change. But then it means that we have to also look at macro issues. Macroeconomic issues. The court system needs to work. NERC needs to be more efficient, and they're doing a lot around regulations.
You know, when you talk about courts, I'm just wondering. Okay, so I start the case today, and then what happens? Anyway, let me ask.
It ends in 50 years.
Let me ask Mr. Omar the same question. Is that the same way it happens in the north? People are struggling whether or not they will buy the meters, or do they get the meters free in the north? Or in Yola, where you are in particular?
You know, it's not only about meters. The entire electrical, items and equipment, no customer is supposed to purchase it. And I saw NEC campaigning about it some days on their social media page. They are saying that you are not supposed to buy or repair your transformer or any other cable that, distribute electricity to your house. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing with the meter, because those are all assets, property of the electricity distribution company. So you are supposed, but that is where you pay for efficiency twice. What I said is that so far when you look at the tariff components of the cost that a customer paid for his electricity, you realize 20 to 30% of that cost is inefficiency. You pay for inefficiency there. And then when you have a problem of vandalism, your local transformer is vandalized, you realize that instead of a disco to come swiftly and fix it, then you find community coming together to bring money and then fix it. That means in your tariff component, you are paying for inefficiency in form of ATC&C. And then when your electricity is vandalized, you also bring money together and pay for that. And then when it comes to meters, you equally pay for it. You wait for when the discos are going to refund you the money in form of, token. So you realize that the inefficiency is a lot. But then, as Mr. Oni said, it's a case of, Nigerian thing and implementation. The NEC has brought a lot of programs regarding metering, from CAPME to national mass metering to meter as a provider and so on. But the summary of all this program, it means that it provides the discos, with the meters to meter those customers for free, with exception of few programs which requires the customer to pay and then the disco refund. And the reason they do that is because they realize that the discos do not have money, to invest in that meter in a short period of time. It says, okay, customers that have money, buy your meters and then we will refund you. It's a form of, customers assisting the distribution company with the liquidity. That argument either is right or wrong is a debatable issue. And I think that's the reason why currently now what they plan to do so far, there are 2 or 3 kind of program, as I mentioned earlier. There is that presidential, there is a World Bank Dissect, and then, meter asset provider. So based on what the government said, they plan to meter 10 million within 5 years. And then they equally try to get 3.2 million meters from the World Bank, program, which means they are going to meter customers free, because the challenge for metering now cannot wait, considering the fact that, as I said, nobody is going to pay 200 naira for unit of electricity when he is not metered. There is no justification for that, and nobody will agree to do that. So even those people that are metered, they find it, and the challenge of metering is that even those that are metered will always complain that, okay, the metering is not good or replacement. And recently, last 2 months, we see some obsolete meters that have expired. It's decommissioned. So a lot of campaign has gone around that the disco need to also replace the meters of those people, the old meters, because they cannot vend new token now. So it's
clearly,
a whole lot of
and
the summary, I like to put this summary into, which is, it's a case of finance, money problem, and the governance problem. The owners of these companies need to either bring money to solve this problem. The government is trying its own part so that we can be able to move past.
I think it'll be good for us to hear from the MDs of any disco who is capable of coming on air to explain these things to Nigerians, because there are so many questions to ask the managing director or CEO or whatever of any distribution company, because we've heard more from their surrogates than from they themselves. Let's understand what you understand. Let's know what the challenges are, so that Nigerians can at least empathize whenever you have issues. Because one of the issues on the ground, gentlemen, which I would like for both of you to speak to, and I'll start from you, Mr. Umar, is as at last year, August, Genco's debts had escalated to approximately 1.495 trillion naira, reflecting significant financial strain within the sector. That's according to Energy Central. We also understand that the payment discrepancies between the NERC, the NERC reported that in the second quarter of last year, Disco's remittances to the NBET dropped from 79.09%, dropped to 79.09% from 99.33% in the first quarter. And of course, we understand that that shortfall also hindered Genco's ability to maintain and expand generation capacities. Gentlemen, speak to this. Mr. Umar, you go first.
Yeah, so the issue of payment dropping, you caught the report for Q2, and if I recall very correctly, that's the time that the price for Banner was increased. Increasing Banner price is a double-edged sword for the discos, because when you move Banner to 225, it means the disco invoice has also pushed up. So it's a case of either the disco collect that revenue from customer, or it risks having high cost of power that they are going to settle to the market. So if you are able to collect, it means you have been able to recover much, reduce your losses. But if you fail to actually collect money from those customers who consume energy on the service base of Ban A tariff, it means your cost is already increased from the Genco's invoice. So failure of you to collect that money will actually reduce the remittance that you're supposed to pay embed. And this actually poses a very difficult problem. So that's why I said, when they increase that Ban A to 200, the discos must collect that money. Without them collecting that money, they are increasing the cost, or they are increasing problem for the Gencos and equally to the gas suppliers. And this is a very serious problem. And I think that is also what necessitated the NERC to release 21 billion naira in June for the first tranche of presidential metering. 21 billion was released to the 11 discos, for the purchase of metering to try and meter, Ban A customers to reduce the case of unmetered. This is all to ensure that they have been able to recover some revenue that they will be able to release to the Gencos and the gas companies. So this is very critical. That's the Q2 report. When you look at the Q3 report that was recently released by the Commission, there has been an improvement in such, because the discos have tried to prioritize their feeders. They have been able to get money and understand how can educate the people to try to understand some of the problem and get that money. So the Q3 report that is available is a bit more improvement compared to the Q2 that you just highlighted. And also I believe that for this year, I like to say that the litmus test for the Ban A is going to happen in that February to May, when we are on the peak of heat period within the year. That's when we'll be able to know that if the discourse will be able to maintain supply for that 20 hours without, serious cases of breakdown, rendering from grid collapse to vandalization, any other issues. And that's when we will say, okay, that Ban A will actually sustain, or else we are going to see
it would seem like even the issues of band-aids tend to have been flattened somehow, but we'll come back to that one. Well, Dr. Oni, your take.
Okay, my take is that first, ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government need to pay their bills. That arrangement needs to be tightened, because if they do not pay their bills to the discos can't pay GENCOs, and GENCOs cannot even pay for gas, right?
What's the percentage of debt that these MDAs owe the discos?
You hear all sorts of figures from around, I've heard around 600 billion naira is what the latest figures. Yes, that's the latest figure I have heard, right? So if you owe that much, and it's not MDAs at the federal level alone, MDAs at the state level. So it's a huge class. Now, if you owe that much, that's already a problem. So you don't expect that you'd have power at some point, because historically there have been debts owed to gas companies. Some of that debt's been paid, but there's still substantial debt. That's one. Secondly, like you did mention, in Q3 it improved because the discos then began to concentrate around Band A guys to ensure that they could get more from them. And you hear people complain, even many people switch off AC, switch off stuff they ordinarily wouldn't have in the past to also bring down their costs. So ministries, departments, agencies of the federal government and state governments need to pay. There needs to be an arrangement where you can even take money from the source before they get their monthly allocation, because that will then help. And in terms of infrastructure, there's more that needs to be done by the discos. With the ongoing sale, we hope that guys who've got the cash are the ones who are now succeeding. There are rumors around who's bought Eco Disco from West Power and Gas, and they seem to be guys who have done it and who are succeeding around the hydro at the moment and the gas company too. So I think if that goes on and we can work around that transmission, the state succeed, revenues will then improve. We can pay for gas, because if you cannot pay for your inputs, then you don't expect an output. So like Abubakar did mention, it's improved actually. From Q2, what you did see was a Q2 report. I think in Q3, it did improve substantially, actually, what the discos have paid. But there's still a lot of debts. By
Mr. Omar, I'd like you to talk to us about what we expect will actually affect our lives. This Siemens project, the presidential initiative that was initiated last month, in the last month of 2024, the Siemens initiative, the Siemens project.
Yeah, the Siemens project has been a bit of a controversial. There are so many things going, but then we are also expecting the TCN to come up with a lot of reports. But currently, as the industry is going now, the TCN themselves, they are undergoing unbundling process into two sub-units independently. And then if you have been following their social media pages, they have been installing some various power transformers across the country. And this is also to help stabilize, the grid. And then also the Siemens project is there available to try to put some infrastructure in place to improve or reduce the cases of, incessant grid collapse that we witnessed in the last year. So not much, information is actually available to the public regarding that Siemens, but the bane of the Siemens is that it means to reduce the cases of those grid collapse and to deliver electricity to people in a very hitch-free manner. So that is a case of, but then there are a lot of ongoing trust issues that the contract or the program has been stalled for long. The project is meant to be completed in 2025, if I recall right. But then up to now we are in 2025, and then we are still redoing it, recommissioning, or I will say, re-enabling or restarting the program that was supposed to be completed for a while. But I think the only thing we have to do is we have to be optimistic. I will only be optimistic regarding Siemens because there is now what I call, a price that, that will serve the markets to be able to recover money. And that kind of things will improve the installation progress of the cement. And I will also, have my fingers crossed, considering the fact that let TCN complete their unbundling process, and then I will see how cement will perform with regard to the TSP segment of the transmission company.
Well, one is still wondering whether or not the Siemens thing is ever going to get off the ground.
Well, we hear about it now, and then we don't, and then we hear about it again, and then we don't hear about it. So we don't really know what's happening.
Too many questions about whether or not it's even a good investment in the first place. But that's a matter for another day. Let me ask you, Dr. Oni, as we wind down in about 3 minutes from now, and I'll ask this question. You've stated it earlier, but I'll ask the question from this text that we got on X. Biziano, that's Olabisi Konye, at Olabisi Konye, saying, the attention that government pays to electricity makes one wonder if they are ready to serve the people or just to satisfy their hunger for personal gain. Ondo south of Irele, Ilaje, SL, the local government area, have been in total darkness for over 12 years. Any offense? Leading to the issue you mentioned the other time about the capacity of states to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity, now that the law empowers them to. What are the mines, the bottlenecks, the challenges that you see in the way for those states that are already taking the initiative? And how do they cross those hurdles?
Okay, thank you very much. First thing, they must understand why we failed at the federal level. Otherwise, they will just replicate the same thing. That's the first thing. Why have we failed? Poor infrastructure, neglect, political interference, and state governors need to be careful so that the right people are in the right places. You do not give political favors. Otherwise, you'll be back running to NERC or the federal government, and it would have failed. So that's critical. They must understand why we failed. Now, when they understand why we failed, and I'll tell you some of the reasons, and I've mentioned some, the state governor shouldn't interfere. Let the best people run that system. Let the laws be implemented. Ensure that you make your state the toast of investors. Let guys come and let your word be your bond. If you say that it's going to be this price, you say it's going to be, the license is going to be for 20 years, then it should be for 20 years. Midway, don't say they voted for the other party or you heard there was a challenge. Politics and business should be separated. I know it's a difficult thing, but if you want to succeed, those are the steps they need to take. They need to ensure that the institutions are in place. They need to think properly about pricing, because once they take over the market in their state, if there are subsidies, the states will have to pay the subsidy. And if they can't afford it, the problem starts. If you say we're giving subsidy of 50 naira, 100 naira per kilowatt hour, and at the end of every month you're able to pay 10 billion, 20 billion, whatever it is, and that's almost all of your subvention, you start to fail. So, you don't have to do it if you do not have the capacity. But if you have the capacity, you need to think about infrastructure. You need to think about how it would work with integrate with the wholesale market, your retail arrangement. Do you want to have a supply arrangement different from distribution? Do you want to have a regulator separate from the guys who check standards? Do you want to have a liability management company? How do you want to deal with gas?
With these few words, these few words of yours, Dr. Oni, I think the state government should just call you for some consultancy. But I don't know if Mr. I think Mr. Omar may also have a word or two about what the minefields that the state governments may have to cross in order to be able to start their own electricity industry apparatus in their individual states.
Yeah, on this state, I like to look at the end from the beginning. What I mean here is that pricing is the major issue. I always sympathize with the states. The electricity generation cost averagely from the grid is around 120 to 150 naira per kilowatt. So I sympathize with the state considering the fact that if they do not, create subsidy for its individual, that means the consumers of that state are going to pay high electricity price. And that will be problematic considering the fact that the case of the consumers failing to pay will trickle back to the market activating their clauses, which means it can go to the extent of disconnecting the entire electricity operating in that zone, and that will be a problem. The second leg I see is that a case of politics interfering in the electricity, because whenever people, huge geographical people, do not have electricity, the only issue that comes there is a political solution. You realize that the politicians are now involved. For instance, the entire community or state or urban area that do not have electricity, you find the senators or the ministers, trying to interfere. And that is problematic because when you cannot be able to pay, politics cannot resolve it.
Oh, dear.
When you bring in politics, you are now creating more costs.
Well, clearly, Mr. Omar, and you and Dr. Oni, you need to sit down with all of these people and have conversations with them, because this angle that you have also gone, I thought Dr. Oni was joking the other time when he said that it will now be a campaign instrument, and you are talking about the same thing. Anyway, those are conversations for future deliberation. We have to thank you at this time. Mr. Abubakar Omar is an electricity consultant based in Yola, as well as Dr. Ayodele Oni, who is an energy policy expert. Gentlemen, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having us.
So we take a short break and we'll be right back.